Cut down day is this week. There's going to be a lot of tough decisions that have to be made. Who is staying? Who is going? Here's my predictions for the Jets 53-man roster.
Jets, Jets!
All right, welcome in. We're talking 53-man prediction video for the roster. I want to go through each of the position groups, give you guys my full 53-man rundown. So without further ado, let's hop into the video. Now, first and foremost, we're starting with two quarterbacks, Aaron Rodgers, Tyrod Taylor. I think we're only going to carry these two going into the season. Same thing we did last year, Aaron Rodgers and Zach Wilson, with our third-string quarterback on the practice squad. I think that's just ultimately what it's going to wind up being. If it winds up being Martinez, cool. If we wind up getting a little Mike White action back onto the practice squad, very cool as well. I do think Jordan Travis ultimately gets the IR. You'll see that when I reveal it in a little bit here, but Jordan Travis basically gets the true redshirt year that none of our other previous young quarterbacks got to have. So keep him on IR. He doesn't get to practice the rest of the year, but he gets to learn from Aaron Rodgers and Tyrod Taylor. All right, with running backs, this one I could see go a few different ways on. So I obviously Breece Hall, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis are the top three. I did end up keeping 𝐒𝐻𝐳𝐫𝐭, and that's because he has shown out a lot over, I'd say, the last week and a half, 2 weeks or so. If Tarik Cohen had stayed on this roster, I don't know if Izzy makes it. If you said you wanted to move on from Izzy, I could understand it. I think it's less likely that he ends up making the practice squad if we were to cut him. So I think we wind up looking for other players that might be able to go under the radar a little bit easier to try and save some roster spots. But I have Izzy making the roster. We're carrying 4 running backs into the season. Wide receiver wise, I got 6 guys: Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, Allen Lazard as the top 3. Then you got Xavier Gibson as your punt returner, Malachi Corley as your kick returner. If you want to make it so Gibson is your punt and kick returner and Corley is just an extra wide receiver, whatever. But I think they're both going to have some special teams presence this year. And then I kept Irv Charles on this mainly because of the switch to this new kickoff style. You got to have as many special teams aces as you can on your roster. And Irv Charles just kind of seems to be Brant Boyer's guy. Now, if you wanted to swap that out for a Smith or for a Brownlee, I'm not really going to argue it. I would say Irv Charles is probably the last man on my roster if I had to give myself any criticisms here. Going into the tight end position, I have us only carrying 3: Tyler Conklin, Jeremy Ruckert, Kenny Yeboah, which means Fursker did not make the roster, and neither did Zach Kuntz. I don't even know if Kuntz ends up making the practice squad. But I have us carrying 3 into the season. Then for tackles, I have us with 5. Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, obviously our 2 starters. Olu Fashanu, our first overall pick, or first pick in the first round, number 11. Carter Warren and Max Mitchell would be the other 2 tackles. Max Mitchell apparently has a little bit of tackle guard ability, which does give me a little bit more comfort from an interior offensive line perspective, because I only have us with AVT and John Simpson as like the really feel-good offensive linemen on the interior at the guard position. Xavier Newman, when we were talking on the Talking Jets panel, I was saying, hey, look, this is going to be the first undrafted free agent that we keep for this year making the roster. So I like what we've seen from him. I think he did wind up having some type of injury during the Giant game, so I might have to take a look and see if that's actually still a thing with him. At the center position, I have Joe Tippmann and Wes Schweitzer. And you might say, hey, there's not a lot of interior offensive line depth. To that, I'd say Wes Schweitzer is also a backup guard. So you could say AVT, John Simpson, and Schweitzer are your 3 guards if you wanted to do that. Tippmann, obviously starting center. I do think we ultimately wind up bringing in a Connor McGovern at some point, but I think it's only going to be after Tippmann struggles or there's an injury on the line in the regular season. So this is our offensive run of talent right here. I think I have my... Where did I put it? Here it is. A little drag down. So we've got 25 players on the offense, which, look, I guess I'll just release this a little square. I have 25 on defense. I got the 3 special teams guys. So, bam, pulled these guys up. Obviously, Zerline, Morstead, and Hennessy. I have Morstead starred right here because I do think it's possible we wind up cutting Morstead with a little handshake wink agreement. Like, hey, you're coming back. You don't have to get exposed to waivers because you've been in the league for so long. So if we cut you, we can keep another player that we're trying to like hold on to while these other teams make these other moves. And then Morstead just comes back before the first game of the season. So you could kind of pencil in Morstead as potentially a cut where you want to save some other player in another aspect of this. Now, I might be a little bit biased here, but I feel like I make this stuff look pretty good. And that's just the confidence I get from wearing a high quality fabric from a high quality company from the sponsor of today's video, Chubbies. If you guys have not heard about them before, they make an awesome 4-way stretch short and a bunch of different stretchy polos and shirts and all these button downs. I got myself this florally pattern because it's the summer. I'm feeling all sorts of good, whether I'm wearing it at a barbecue, a tailgate, or slinging back a few beers with the boys, watching the game on the couch. I'm feeling comfortable. You guys know I've prioritized comfort since having my second kid because I just don't have the time to deal with all the headaches of shopping around. I want to get some nice quality gear. So Chubbies has hooked it up with a 20% off promo code Jets Talk over at chubbyshorts.com. It'll get you 20% off your entire order. So ladies, if you want your guy looking good, go over to chubbyshorts.com and use my promo code Jets Talk to help support the channel and get yourself some nice gear. Thank you so much for watching the show. At the defensive edge position, I have Haason Reddick on there, which interestingly enough, if he does not report to camp, he's put on the non-football participant list. Is that what it is? So some sort of non-football related list that doesn't count against your salary cap, which we see reflected in our over the cap number, which is sitting somewhere around $19-20 million, somewhere along there. And he would not count towards your 53-man roster. So him just hanging out right here could mean we have that extra spot for a Brownlee or for a Smith or for your other, favorite player that you haven't seen on this roster. Maybe it's a Codrington or something like that. But right now, Haason Reddick, Jermaine Johnson, in a best case scenario, are both our starting edge rushers. I got Michael Clemens, even though there's been a little bit of a maybe downturn as far as how fans might feel about him, given the depth at our defensive line positions. I do think he's taken a lot of snaps with the ones. I'd be very surprised if the Jets wound up letting him go. Will McDonald rounding out the edge rusher side of things in our main rotation of 8 players. Then you got Tack McKinley and Braden McGregor, 2 studs from this preseason. Tack obviously coming back into his own, being a former number 1 overall pick, but Braden McGregor has had himself a really nice preseason as well, so I like that we have room for him. At the defensive tackle position or interior defensive line, Quinnen Williams and Javon Kinlaw get the nod as the starters. Leki Fotu and Solomon Thomas factor in as our rotational guys across our, call it 8-man front, or 2 4-man lines that we rotate between. And then I have Leonard Taylor III, the seemingly first round pick talent out of Miami. I think this is someone that you can keep an eye on as long as the motivation is there and he continues to trend in the right direction. This is really exciting to wind up watching. And look, you could wind up keeping Watts as well, with Haason Reddick potentially not being on the roster right now. You are going to carry a lot more defensive linemen, and I would rather risk a different player at another position than one of these top defensive linemen when we rotate through so many as is. I think it would be silly to expose any of those guys to waivers. I have, for linebackers, us only carrying 4. I believe we only carried 4 last year, too. I'd have to double check on that. But Mosley Williams, obviously, are 2 starters. Sherwood and Barnes round out the linebacker room. Now, I will say a lot of people will want Surratt here. You could add him in there with the same sort of maneuvers that I've talked about with the rest of the roster here. If you didn't want to keep Izzy, or if you didn't want to swap out Irv Charles, or if you didn't want to, if Reddick's not on the roster and you want to put Surratt in here. I didn't want to put Surratt on here just because I think more than likely, if we have to add a third linebacker in there, it's either going to be Sherwood or it's going to be Barnes. And then not even on just that, we're going to have a third safety. I think Ashton Davis plays more coverage against tight ends than adding in an extra linebacker will. So I think you'll see 2 linebackers mainly in every formation that we put out there, aside from maybe goal line. On outside cornerback, you got Sauce and Reed, and then 2 young guns in Jarek Bernard-Converse and Quantez Stiggers. Those guys have really performed well throughout the course of the preseason, so I've really liked what we've gotten out of them. And then obviously Reed and Sauce are just incredible. Michael Carter II, starting slot. We better pay him. I want to see him paid. Honestly, I want to see him paid before Haason Reddick because I feel like he's done it the right way. Brandon Echols, final year of his contract, as well as Reed and as well as Carter. So you got to try and figure some stuff out from that perspective. But he comes back all the same, can play outside, can play inside. At strong safety, you got Chuck Clark and Isaiah Oliver, and then rounding out the safety room, obviously with Tony Adams, and Ashton Davis. So that's my 53-man lineup. That's 25 for the offense, 25 for the defense. Now, I do think this is ultimately how it's going to wind up shaking out. It seems like if you guys follow me on any of my other social media platforms, people really did like this roster, aside from maybe the 𝐅𝐑𝐄𝐿 selection. I would say was probably the most hot button question on here. But I'm interested to hear what you guys have to say. What do you think of my roster? Do you think this is what the 53-man roster is ultimately going to look like? What would you plug in if Haason Reddick doesn't count towards the roster? How does that factor into maybe what I've done here? Let me know in the comment section down below. And as always, go Jets.
J-E-T!